Let's just have a moment of quiet. Can you hear that? Can you hear that? That's Tim Ducey crying because he is convinced that someone has nicked all his gaffer tape and has put it all over the floor in some sort of square pattern. Tim, don't worry, I've left you a little bit on the end of the roll. You'll love it. We'll get back to these in a little while. 20 odd years ago, you were kind enough to send me away. Yeah. And I went to work for an organisation called Oasis, and one of my joys of working for Oasis, let's call it that, was that I had to go and attend the Evangelist Conference. The Evangelist Conference happened in Swanwick, up in Derbyshire. It happened at December time because at December time churches are doing their own thing, and so there's really no use for evangelists. So we got together, and the first year that I was there, there was this very famous evangelist that came to speak to the conference. Everybody was very, very excited about this guy, and sure enough, on the first night, he turned up to take the first session. Now, he was, he looked, this isn't him, but he looks a little bit like this, okay? Yeah, there we go. And the reason he looked like this was he was very, very, very concerned about purity. And his organisation had actually made a bunch of tracksuits to make sure that male evangelists were not attractive to the fairer sex. Yep, good job. I think that's worked. And in actual fact, he had tracksuits there that we could buy and support his ministry. Yeah, I was a volunteer. I didn't have any money. But anyway, he got to speaking about evangelism and the importance of it and the joy of being an evangelist. And he was really going for it. And then he said, "Stop the tape." So the little boy, those in the days when we had cassettes, do you remember them? And you heard the click at the back. He says, "I'm now going to share with you a story that I've never shared with anybody before. This story is so salacious." Everybody sits and takes a second look. "This story is so salacious, I want you to keep it to yourself for prayer." And so he tells us this story about an evangelist that wasn't wearing a tracksuit and some trouble that he got into. And he went on, and we all went, right, okay, yeah, all right, we'll pray about that. Then, the following day, he comes to do session 2. And he's there in his tracksuit again, and all the women are going, yep, that's still working. And he says, so he gets into his second session, and he's mining the depths of the Bible, and then he says, "Stop the tape. I'm going to tell you a story that I've never told anybody in the whole world ever before." And then he told us exactly the same story as he had told us the night before. And everybody's looking at each other going, what on earth is going on? The old boy is losing it. Let's turn to Mark's Gospel and chapter 8. And we're going to jump straight in at verse 1. Excuse if these words are slightly different to the ones on the screen. During those days, another large crowd gathered. Since they had nothing to eat, Jesus called his disciples to him and said, "I have compassion for these people. They have already been with me 3 days and have had nothing to eat. If I send them home hungry, they will collapse on the way, because some of them have come a very long distance." His disciples answered, "But where in this remote place can anyone get enough bread to feed them?" "How many loaves do you have?" Jesus asked. 7, they replied. He told the crowd to sit on the ground, and when he had taken the 7 loaves, and given thanks, he broke them and gave them to his disciples to set before the people, and they did so. They had a few small fish as well. He gave thanks for them also and told his disciples to distribute them. The people ate and were satisfied. Afterwards, the disciples picked up 7 basketfuls of broken pieces that were left over. About 4,000 men were present, and having sent them on their way, he got into the boat with his disciples and went to the region of Dalmanutha. Has Mark lost it? Has Mark, in his rush to finish the gospel, just repeated the same story twice? Has he lost the plot? Is he just repeating himself? It's the same event, he's got his numbers muddled up, and sadly there is a repeat in the text. I mean, we all know all right, Andy, is there a slide? Not yet. Okay. We all know the story, a well-known story of Jesus and the disciples in a desolate place in the wilderness. This place would have been understood as a place of danger. This is not a place for a picnic. Jesus and his disciples identify this huge need. Jesus has compassion. And there's a slide, I hope, coming up that talks about compassion. There it is. Okay, and Jesus has compassion, and this word is used in both stories. Compassion, and we've got a little love heart there, which is very nice. Actually, the word compassion is a gut-wrenching love. It turns the stomach upside down. It really needs to have some intestines or something in the middle of the word compassion. I tried that on Google. Nothing doing, I'm afraid. Disciples look round and see this massive crowd of people. And they are good Jewish boys. And they know that hospitality is part of their remit. Disciples start talking to one another and say, well, maybe we should just tell them to clear off. You know, maybe somebody else could take care of this. Maybe someone in the surrounding villages could take care of this. But there are no surrounding villages. Well, maybe we, Jesus, he could do one of those magic tricks. Maybe if we look at him long enough and remain silent long enough, maybe he will do it. It's like all of us. We all have our to-do lists, and we look down the length of the list in front of us, and we think, why isn't somebody else doing this? Why isn't someone other than me doing this? Or better still, maybe we could do a little miracle and the to-do list would just shrink. So they tap Jesus up for a miracle, and Jesus looks back at them and says, no, you take care of it. You take care of it. How are we going to do that, Jesus? We haven't got the money, we don't know where to go, we haven't got anything, it just can't be done. And Jesus says, don't panic. What resources do we have? What have we got? And on this occasion, the disciples said, well, we've got 7 loaves. Don't tell them about the fish. They are looking dodgy, past their sell-by date. Don't mention the fish. 7 loaves and 2 fish. I told you not to mention the fish. Then Jesus says, get everybody to sit down. You see, that's the trouble with men. When men don't know what to do or know that there's trouble coming, they just wander around and they look untidy. Everybody knows that. All the women are nodding. Okay, and the men are milling around and saying to one another, just keep moving, look busy, that's fine, we'll be all right, all 4,000 of us. Jesus says to the disciples, get them to sit down, because practically, it's a lot less confusing and a lot less daunting if people aren't milling around. Jesus then has his Eucharist moments, takes the bread, takes the fish, gives thanks for it, breaks it, and gives it. Now, if you're a disciple and you're not quite sure how this is going to pan out, if you're thinking there's 4,000 of them and there's 12 of us, 13 if you count Jesus, I know what happens when a hungry crowd starts a stampede for bread. So you pick up a basket and you start delivering bread to people, and you just make your way to the edge of the crowd, because if your last loaf or piece of loaf is delivered at the edge of the crowd, at least you've got a chance to run down the hill and you've got a head start on everybody else. And as the disciples deliver the food, distribute the food, maybe a conversation, Peter's kind of dishing out the loaves as best he's able, panicking because he thinks he's about to get crushed. And then he goes into the next group of people, and James shouts out, "Oh, Peter, you idiot, we've already done that group." And before they know where they are, the job is jobbed. The world is blessed. And the disciples are satisfied. It's the same story, isn't it? Mark is just having a moment. Well, maybe Mark is trying to say something to us in the differences. So in the story of the 5,000, there is a difference about geography when you compare it to that of the 4,000. In the 5,000, Jesus is in Galilee. It's a home fixture. He's amongst the villages. He's amongst his own. In the feeding of the 4,000, it's an away fixture. He's in this place in the area called the Decapolis. Decapolis means 10 towns. Dec means 10, like, December being the 10th month. It would have been, unless some of the Caesars had not, thrown their toys out the pram because they wanted a month named after them. So Jesus is not in the same place. Then there's a difference of the issue at hand, the stimulation for Jesus' compassion. With the feeding of the 5,000, Jesus is really concerned because they're like a sheep without a shepherd. In the feeding of the 4,000, Jesus is concerned because they are fatigued. They've been with him 3 days. If he sends them home, a lot of them ain't going to make it. That doesn't do too well for your reputation. And then there's the difference of numbers. So when feeding the 5,000, it is 5,000, and there are 5 loaves. Anybody got a clue here? Is the word Torah anywhere in our thinking? And then there's the 2 fish and 2 tablets and 10 commandments and 12 baskets of food left over. Tribes of Israel. Numbers in the account we've just read, it's 4,000. 4 corners of the earth, maybe. 7 baskets, 7 loaves, and the number 7, meaning complete harmony. And then there's a difference in the word basket. In the feeding of the 5,000, it's a word that is pronounced kophinos. It's a small basket that the Jewish people would walk around with just every day. When you get to the feeding of the 4,000, it's spurious. And spurious is it's a much bigger basket, much bigger deal. It's the basket that Paul climbs into when he's getting let down the wall, when he's escaping Damascus. And then there's the people. There's the people. In the feeding of the 5,000, these people are Jewish. These people are Jewish. These people, as we read in chapter 7, are known as the children. In the feeding of the 4,000, they are Greek. They are Gentiles. In the feeding of the 5,000, zone of the privileged. In the feeding of the 4,000, zone of the disadvantages. In the story that we have just read, what Mark is trying to say, loud and proud, that this unique Jesus is working where he's not meant to. He's working on the Sabbath and on the weekdays. He's working in the synagogue and he's working on the street. He's working with the God Squad and he's working with those who are fairly and squarely outside that. When it comes to the feeding of the 4,000, Jesus is working on the wrong side of the tracks. Jesus is working on the wrong side of the tracks. He's not where he's meant to be. Every good Jewish boy would know you don't go there. God isn't there. God isn't for them. God is for us. God is ours. We've set up a whole bunch of rules to tell us who's in and who's out. And of course, as Neil taught us in the last few weeks, these purity laws which tell us who's in and who's out. To give yourself a fighting chance to be in, you've got to be Jewish. If you're a gentle Gentile, in fact, or any other sort of Gentile you care to mention, you got no chance. You got no chance. Zone of the privileged. Zone of the disadvantaged. Jesus is working in the wrong side of the tracks. Walter Brueggemann says these words and he's talking about these purity laws, these laws that have been set up to decide who's in and who's out. Brueggemann says the purpose of the purity regulations is to make a difference between us and them, between the good people who have access to the goodies of God and those who have no admission to those goodies. Purity laws are articulated by the managers of the goodies in order to guard access to the goodies, to give some preferential treatment and to deny it to others. It has always been the same, it seems to me, and so it remains today. We've got access laws in 2018. You're in or you're out because of the way that you dress. I was coming home on a train yesterday from London, and there was a crowded carriage, and I had the misfortune or the fortune to sit amongst some Tonbridge schoolboys who were talking about the blazers that they were going to buy next year. You got one blazer for hockey, another blazer for rugby, another blazer for classics. I went to Hugh Christie, I haven't got a clue what that is. But what was clear was, depending on what blazer you had, you're either in or you're out. If you work here, you're in. If you work there, you're out. If you have this sort of job, you're in. If you have that sort of job, you are out. If you go to this school, brilliant. If you go to that school, tough luck, mate. If you've got an accent that has spent too much time in South London, you're out. If you have a nice, clipped Tonbridge accent, you're in, maybe. If you've got this much money, welcome to the club. If you haven't got that much money, sorry, buddy, this place ain't for you. You don't look like this, you weigh what? You're in, you're out. Would never happen in a church circle, would it? Well, you see, I'm old enough to remember when denominations were important, and I can remember the story of Edna. Edna was a grandmother, and she was visiting a Baptist church on a day when a very fiery Baptist preacher was preaching, and he was really, really Baptist. And he started his sermon as he always did. I trust we're all Baptists here. And there were a few people there that weren't, but they knew this guy by reputation, so they didn't say anything. But Edna didn't know. She was a visitor. She said, "Sorry, sir, I'm a Methodist." "A Methodist? A Methodist? Why on earth are you a Methodist?" And Edna just said, "Well, I'm sorry, sir. My dad was a Methodist and my grandfather was a Methodist, so I'm a Methodist." He said, "That's the most ridiculous thing I ever heard. If your dad was a moron and your grandfather was a moron, would you be a moron?" "No, sir, I guess I'll be a Baptist." As we do life in 2018, it seems to me that we inflict upon ourselves access laws, and we can quite easily count ourselves out. One of the reasons that some people think that this story is just a repeat of the 5,000 is that the disciples seem a bit dumb, that they don't remember what happened only a few chapters ago. But my experience of 30 years of ministry is that yesterday's miracle doesn't guarantee faith today. Yesterday's miracle doesn't guarantee faith today. Oh, God has done it once in my life. God has met me once. I've had my turn. I've had my turn. I can't go back again. I've screwed up again. So I'm out. I'm not in like other people. I'm really happy. Well, no, I'm not really happy. It's great to hear that, God is blessing other people. But if God is blessing other people, that means there's less blessing left for me, and therefore I feel left out. Yeah, because that's the sort of God we worship. A God with finite resources, where there's only so much blessing he can put around, and then he just runs out. Unfortunately, I've not seen or encountered that God in the Bible. God seems to do it for others, but he doesn't do it for me, so I'm not part of the in crowd. I'm excluded. I watch people, and they've got their hands in the air, and all I can think of, my future, is up in the air. I hear some people hear words from God, and I listen really hard, and all I can hear is tinnitus. I look around my church and I see people lost in worship. And if I'm honest, I'm just lost. Mark wants you to know that these purity laws that you've imposed upon yourself don't apply. Jesus looks at you as he's working the wrong side of the tracks and has compassion. He is moved. He is torn apart inside as he sees you living a life that he never intended you to live. So here we are in TN10, a place where I grew up, here where, my parents lived for most of their life. My mum died when she was 61, and my dad died when he was 76. Statistically speaking, you live an extra 10 years if you don't live here, but you live in Iton. Living in TN10. You live and work in Longmead and Trench. Really? In? Out? A few months ago, Dan, in desperation, invited me to go and speak at the youth weekend, which is down in Dalesdown. He wanted me to tell them my life story and about how I had done faith and how I was still hanging in there with Jesus. And as I'm driving down there, I'm thinking, why do they want to listen to me? I'm old, I'm fat, I'm 53. I did youth work 20 odd years ago. I don't know what to say. And as I was driving down, and this doesn't happen very often, in fact it happens really rarely, I just got this phrase buzzing around my head. And the phrase is a simple one. It says, well, we'll just see about that. We'll just see about that. And so I talked to them about my Christian walk and my spirituality, which is more sort of blood, sweat and guts than anything else. But this phrase, well, we'll just see about that, kept on recurring and recurring, and I tried to slot it in every now and again, and it seemed to make sense, and people seemed to be helped by what I said. But it seems to me that this is what this church is all about. This is what this story is all about. This is what we are all about. So this week, I read an email about my friend Sally, who's sitting down with someone and said, I've moved into this flat and it's okay, but it's a bit spartan. I haven't got any carpets and I'll never be able to afford any carpets anytime soon. And Sally says, we'll just see about that. And love does, gets into action, and carpets are on their way. And then we had some people come in this week, and Lidl has entered into partnership with TBC. Fantastic. And we had a whole bunch of fresh bread there, and we just put out a sign, help yourself. And there were people coming in to close to go, and people coming in going, really, we can just take this? Yeah. But the message is that, I can't afford nice fresh bread. I have to buy the plastic stuff that kind of sticks to the roof of your mouth when you eat it. And John and Jane Marsh were round at the food bank, Sustain, just down the corridor there, bagging up foods for those people, and those people for whom the bank holiday weekend is a real stress because they got kids at home for an extra day that are going to eat them out of house and home. And they are saying, as parents, we cannot afford to feed our kids. And John and Jane say, well, we'll just see about that. And then this young lad comes into the church and he sits down with my friend Gemma, and he says, Gemma, my life is an absolute mess. It's full of marijuana and violence, and I'm going nowhere, and my world is in absolute chaos, and everything I hear is saying that my life is worthless. And Gemma looks at him squarely in the face and says, we'll just see about that. We'll just see about that. And then there were people sitting on the sofas out there waiting to see Dave Trice and the team, or hobbits as we like to call them, waiting to see our friends in Crosslight, that used to be called WKDA, and I'm still getting used to it. And they're there with their bits of paper that tell them in no uncertain terms that they're in trouble and their life is about to be repossessed and they've got no chance. And Dave and his team say, bring your paperwork, because we're just going to see about that. And then I go into Longmead School, where I have the privilege of being a governor. And so as we get out of Ofsted says, where's your resources? And Longmead say, well, we haven't got any resources because we're Longmead. And everybody says if you go to Longmead, it's a sink school. And if you go to Longmead, you don't deserve resources. And the church up the road, called TBC, says, no books, no maths resources. Well, we'll just see about that. And then I meet with my friend Gordon, who's going to take a team to the back end of nowhere in Uganda, and he's going to sit down and he's going to have some time in a school surrounded by kids who have been taught that they live in Uganda in a place called Rentobo. And if you go there, the world says you don't deserve education and you don't deserve healthcare. And Gordon, in one of his particularly fetching shirts, winks and says, we'll just see about that. Dave, we heard you preach a couple of weeks ago. This is how you ended that sermon. Are you repeating yourself? Yep. Absolutely. Absolutely. But I believe with every fibre of my being that Mark didn't. He wanted his readers, he wanted us to know in the difference between the two stories that Jesus, in his compassion, works the wrong side of the tracks. And that he takes and blesses and breaks and gives the resources of the kingdom that we and others might be fed. That we might take part ourselves in this miracle and be satisfied. Let's just stop there. Let's just bow our heads for a moment. Or maybe you find it more helpful to look at the image on the screen. The last one, please, Andy. As you look around the church, see all these tracks on the floor. Where do you see yourself? Which side of the tracks are you? You count yourself in? Count yourself out? What purity laws have you adopted for yourself because that internal voice has convinced you that they apply to you? What of the world's voices have you adopted for yourself because you are convinced they apply to you? My dear friends, can I encourage you to access the prayer ministry this morning? To get rid of those messages, that internal voice, that world voice. May you afresh bump into Jesus and enjoy his compassion. May you enjoy the resources of the kingdom which Jesus takes and blesses and breaks and gives to you. And may we, as TBC, may we pray together as one church that God would take us, that God would bless us, that he would break us and give us to the task of his kingdom. And may we, like the disciples of old, be involved in a miracle, and in the process be blessed ourselves. And all God's people said,
Please continue to pray or reflect. We're just going to sing to you the first verse of this song, and then we'll go back and all join in together.